King F8. Okay, 1 second. B7. Okay. All right. Okay, 1 second. Just setting up. I'll go over Magnus's game first. Okay. Okay. Does it sound good? Sound good or not? Does it sound good? Okay. Okay. Just tell me. Is it too? Am I too low? By the way, am I too low? Maybe. I might be a little bit soft because people were saying I was too soft yesterday. They were saying the volume was too soft. The microphone's a bit low. Okay, let me turn it up. Did it change? It didn't change, but whatever. I'll up it. How about now? Is this better? Is it too loud or not? How about now? I just changed it. I turned it up a bit. That's better. Okay, I'll just put it at max then, which is just because this is max. How's it now? Is it better now? Now is it good now? This is the max. I mean, I can probably find some way to boost it, but this is the max. It's fine. Okay, all right, let's get going. Okay, 1 second. Okay, let's get going. Okay, all right, I'm gonna start. Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at round number 5 of the Qatar Masters Open being held here in Doha. Now, the first game we're going to be taking a look at is obviously the game played by the 5-time former world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen, who for the 4th time in 5 rounds is playing against another one of Vishy Anand's disciples, Bharat Subramanian, I believe. Let me click on the name to make sure I've got it right. Subramanian. So, Magnus playing against the 4th Indian in 5 days. Must be getting tired of facing these monster kids. But nonetheless, the pairings are the pairings, and you have to keep moving forward. All right. So, Magnus with the white pieces, he starts with e4. We get e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and Magnus plays bishop c4, essaying the classic Gucci piano, which, of course, I have used to great effect as well in this tournament, having won 2 games with it. So, Subramanian plays knight f6, we get d3, h6 played here, we get castles, and now d6. Now, it's a little bit different than the normal setups that we see. Usually, black tries to put this bishop on c5 very early and play on this long diagonal, but instead, Subramanian has another idea here, which is after a4, he goes g6 with the idea of fianchettoing his bishop to g7. Now, Magnus did need to play a4 here or c3 in this position because once again, as I mentioned in my video yesterday, if you aren't very careful, you can lose this light square bishop very easily. For example, say you play h3, after knight to a5, you have no retreating square on a2. If you go to b3, black will swap the knight for the bishop and have the bishop pair. If you go bishop b5 here, there's c6, bishop a4, and then b5, and you have to go back to b3 once again, and black can play this position with the 2 b's. So, Magnus goes h4 here in this position, or a4 I should say. So at knight a5, you can retreat the bishop back to a2. We get g6, c3, bishop g7, knight bd2, castles, and now Magnus plays b4 here, trying to take as much space as possible on the queen side of the board. Subramanian plays king h7, we get rook to e1, and now he goes knight to h5. Now, it's very clear from the get-go that Subramanian is not afraid of Magnus. He wants to be very aggressive, and he wants to try to checkmate Magnus's king. First of all, he's gone for the fianchetto, but additionally wants to play f5 or knight to f4 and try to checkmate Magnus. So, Magnus plays b5, Subramanian plays knight a5, and now Magnus goes bishop a2. Now, one of the reasons that it makes a lot of sense psychologically to play like this against Magnus is Magnus, in multiple interviews, has always said one of his biggest priorities in chess is having a safe king or king safety itself. So, when you're playing Magnus, you want to checkmate him, make him feel uncomfortable, and maybe get him out of his comfort zone. So here we get f5 from Subramanian. Now this move, I think, is simply being a little bit too aggressive. I think that Subramanian was thinking he's doing really well here, but sometimes you have to keep yourself in check and not lash out super quickly. For example, in this position, if he had played a move like a6 first, asking Magnus what he's doing on the queen side, while intending to play f5 later on, would have been better because Magnus has to figure out something to do, and f5 is not going anywhere. Black will always have this pawn thrust down the road. So instead, we get f5 here. Magnus trades on f5, and now he plays d4, which is an excellent move because what it does, it gets rid of one of the weaknesses on d3. Also, black has this knight that's on the rim. It's very, very dim here. Knight can't get back into the game very easily, and Magnus trying to open up the e file for his rook on e1, and additionally put pressure on the central pawn on e5. Also, if black trades the pawn on d4, for example, here, after knight takes d4, it's very, very hard for black to attack here. And this knight on d4 targets the bishop on f5. You can also jump to e6. Say black were to play like a random move like a6, you swap the knight for the bishop and go bishop b1. And suddenly there are all kinds of problems on these diagonals. So, Subramanian plays knight f4, and Magnus goes knight to e4, and now he plays this move d5. Now, d5 is simply a blunder in this position, but it's already very hard for black to play because there's a lot of pressure in the center of the board here. Your pawn on e5 is under attack, your knight on f4 is under attack, and additionally, white has these knights, which are very, very well placed on f3 and e4. So, computer wants us to move rook c8, which frankly is just an impossible move for a human to play, considering the chaos and all the weaknesses that black has to deal with. So, Subramanian plays d5, and I think this is very much a shot in the dark. You're playing the world chess champion. You got to go in, try to hit him with that knockout punch, because it just might land like it did in round number 2 when Magnus lost to Suleimanov. So we get d5, but unfortunately, the tactics don't quite work out. We get bishop takes f4, and now this move bishop takes e4 is played. If black were to take this bishop on f4 here, after knight to c5, white is simply much better here due to the knight on the rim. The weaknesses on d5 as well as b7, and white controls this open e file. And to make matters worse, white can also try to create a kebab with knight to e5 here, and these knights are really, really well placed for white. So we get rook to b8 being played here by not rook b8, sorry, we get bishop takes e4 being played by Subramanian instead. And the reason for this is that he's hoping that after bishop takes e5 and bishop takes f3, gf3, that Magnus's king will be open and a little bit weak. Now, while Magnus's king looks a little bit weak on g1 due to this compromised kingside pawn structure, the problem is here that black has only one active piece, which is the queen. The knight is still on the rim, so if you ever go knight c4, for example, white can always just swap the bishop for the knight. Now, in this position, white has one extra pawn, so in the long term, the extra material is going to matter. So, because the knight is so passive and will always be trade-off no matter where it goes, whether it's c4 or b3, essentially, black just doesn't have enough counterplay. So, Subramanian does play knight c4 anyway, and Magnus plays bishop g3 first. Now, you could, of course, just take on c4 and go bishop g3 as well, or a move like queen e2 to target the pawn on c4, but it's not really necessary, and bishop g3 is actually extremely precise for Magnus, because what he realizes is that he will always be able to exchange the bishop on a2 for the knight on c4, but also you might want to go bishop b1 and target the other diagonal towards that king on h7. So bishop g3 is a very, very good move for Magnus because he realizes that he can always take the knight, but there might be a spot where you want to reroute this bishop to b1, and so he keeps more options available. Whereas once you trade on c4, it's done, it's finished, and yes, white is still much better, but you've lost the extra option, and you want to keep that option always available. So we get bishop g3, h5. Magnus plays h4 to stop black from pushing here. Say you go bishop b3, h4. It's spaghetti time. There's queen g5 incoming. Let's say you trade and go bishop e5 here, for example. Black might have ideas like queen g5 and h3 to go for the classic lolly checkmate on g2. Even beyond that, black can potentially play something like king h1 and then go rook 8, e8 here. And now there's all kinds of pressure in the center of the board. There are hooks with h3 and checkmate threats on g2, and it's just not super easy for white to play. So, in this position, Magnus plays h4, we get a6. Now Magnus decides to trade the bishop for the knight here, because what he wants to do is after d takes c4, he goes queen to e2 here. And now Magnus is effectively winning this game for a very simple reason. First of all, Magnus is up one pawn in the center of the board here with this nice structure, c3 and d4. Additionally, black has these massive weaknesses on c4 and c7, and white can also try to create the kebab with queen to e7 down the road. So, here's Subramanian trades the pawns on b5. Again, it's a very hard position to play, but also besides being a hard position to play, you'll notice that black only has 10 minutes on the clock here, and we're only on move number 22. So only 10 minutes on the clock, 18 moves to go. Very, very difficult position, which may already just be losing. Subramanian blunders with a takes b5. Now, after a takes b5, Magnus takes back. We get the move queen to d5. Now, probably Subramanian thought, well, I'm targeting both the pawns on f3 and b5. I'm going to get back one of the pawns, and how bad can it be? In fact, it turns out to be really bad. So, Magnus plays queen to e4 here, offering the trade of these queens. And, excuse me, you guys, I'm going to have a sip of water. 1 second. Excuse me. And after queen to e4, Subramaniam takes on b5. Now, Subramaniam were to trade the queens on e4, he undoubles the white pawns, and now white starts pushing p up the center of the board and will win very soon. So we get queen takes b5. And now Magnus trades the rooks, and he has this all-star move, rook to b1, creating the right triangle, as well as a pyramid of Giza here with the queen and the rook, and massive infiltration on the 7th rank. So at this point, white is completely winning. Now, I think Subramaniam, when he played queen d5, probably missed this idea of rook to b1. He probably only saw bishop takes c7 or queen e7 here. But rook b1 effectively wins the game, because even though black is still only down one pawn after queen a5 and rook takes b7, the pawns on c4 and c7 are double, but they're also extremely weak here, and white is infiltrating on the 7th rank as well. So Subramaniam plays queen takes c3, rook takes c7, and now we get this move rook a1 check, king g2, and this move rook to e1 is played. Now, Subramaniam could have also played queen c1 here, trying to go for checkmate on either h1 or f1 here, but this loses because white can sack the rook with rook takes g7, king takes g7, and after queen to e7 check, if black goes king g8, there's queen e8 check, king g7 would get checkmated here on h8. And if you were to go king h7, there's queen f7, king h8, bishop e5 is checkmate. And after king h6, bishop f4, white simply wins the queen on c1. So Subramaniam instead plays rook to e1, but here Magnus can still sack the rook if he wants with rook takes g7. Now, Magnus does not do this move. Surprisingly, he plays queen d5 here, which is still very good for white, but it's not best. If he had played rook takes g7, king g7, sacking the rook, after bishop to e5, white is simply winning here, because after king f7, queen b7 check, king to e8, white can check on c6. And here, if you go king d8, there's bishop f6 here, and you have to block with the rook, and you will lose shortly. And if you go king f7, I can check, I can gobble, and we get back to essentially the same position, where here I go queen d7 check, king f8, and then after queen g7, king to e8, we get queen g8, king to e7, and now there's queen h7 check. If you go back to e8, I'll just take another pawn with check. If you go king e6, I have this beautiful idea with d5, checking the king. If you take the pawn, you lose the queen. If you take the bishop, there's a skewer with queen to h8, which will collect the queen on c3, and again, white will win the game. So instead, Magnus decides to play queen d5. Now, I'm kind of surprised that he played this after a 3-minute think. Probably Magnus could have used like 10-15 minutes to play a different move, but I suspect at this point he thought all roads lead to Rome. And besides that, he's not having a great tournament. He probably just wants to get the game over with, and he figures it doesn't matter which move he played. So instead of calculating, he does go queen d5, but here Subramaniam blunders with queen to c1. In this position, after move queen to d3, if it had been played, Magnus's only option here was to actually take on c4, and after takes and bishop f6, white is still quite a bit better here with the 2 extra pawns, but it's not going to be easy to win this position in spite of that. Say you go d5, for example, after king g7, d6, king f7, black's king is getting over to put pressure on the pawn on d6, your pawn on h4 is weak, and you have these stacked pawns on f2 and f3. Now, do I think Magnus would have won the game anyway? Probably he would have won, but it would have been a long grind if this had happened. But Subramaniam, very, very low on time, just plays the move queen c1 instead. And now Magnus plays a very nice move, bishop to h2, and the king on g1 is as snug as a bug in a rug. There's no checkmate, also because the rook and the queen are arranged wrong. If you had the other arrangement with the queen on e1, there would be mating ideas. But here, with the rook on e1, you simply have no checkmates. So, Subramaniam plays rook to e2. Magnus goes queen to f7. We get rook takes f2 here. Subramaniam sacking the rook, desperately trying to come up with some miracle to save the game. After rook takes f2, Magnus plays a great move, king to g3, ignoring the free rook. He does not want to take the sacrificed rook, but after king g3, black simply has no way to keep the game going, because white is threatening to checkmate on g7 here. The rook is hanging, and it's just all over. So here Subramaniam plays queen to h6. Magnus plays queen takes bishop on g7, trading down the pieces. We get queen takes queen, rook takes queen, king takes rook, and now Subramaniam resigns the game because white simply has one extra bishop on the board in the endgame, and it's power overwhelming. So Magnus Carlsen wins his 5th round game. He moves now to 3.5 points out of 5, still half point or 1 point out of the lead, but he is slowly drawing closer to the leaders. All right. So let's move on to the next game. Now, the next game, of course, is my game. Now, I'm on a grade score of 3.5 points out of 4, and I'm playing against the talented Uzbeki junior, Javokir Sindarov. Now, I did play against Shamsuddin Vokadov the other day, one of the very talented Uzbekis, but now I play one of the ones who is even higher up on the food chain in Sindarov. Now, Sindarov is a very, very strong player. He's some memorable wins in events like the World Cup against other talented juniors like Alireza Firouzja. He still is a little bit below the most talented of them all, Noterbek Abdustorov, but still a very strong player, 2658, up and coming. So, game starts with e4. And here I play the move c5, we get knight to f3, and now I play knight c6, we get knight c3, and I decide to play g6 here. Now, I spoke to Sindarov after the game, and he told me that he had actually done a lot of preparation for many different openings. He had looked at the Caro-Kann, for example, he had looked at the French, he had looked at some Sicilians, but he had not looked at what I played in the game, which was g6. Now, one thing that makes me a little bit different from the other top players is I do play a lot of events like Title Tuesday on chess.com. So for that reason, I always have to be very, very mindful and careful of what openings I play. Now, during Title Tuesdays, I've actually played e5 in this position. There was a famous game, I want to say maybe it was 2.5 months ago against Jeffrey Zhang, where I played e5, and after bishop c4, I played the move g6. Now, obviously, what I mean with all this is that I have to be very cognizant of what I play, and also, frankly, my memory has to work, and I have to remember some of these things. So, because I was able to remember in my mind before the game that I had played this online, I figured Sindarov would have seen that game, and he probably would be considering playing knight c3, hoping for this e5 system. So, after knight c3, I played g6 instead. We get d4. I trade on d4, and now I play bishop g7, and we've reached essentially an accelerated dragon, which will turn back into a normal dragon very shortly. Now, one of the big differences here is that in this position, white cannot put the pawn on c4. So if you play the pure accelerated dragon order like this with knight c6, white does have the opportunity to play c4 and create the classic Maroczy bind structure here with the pawns on e4 and c4, and it can be very unpleasant to play. So we get it from this order where white no longer can create the Maroczy bind with the pawns on e4 and c4. We have bishop e3, knight f6, and now Sindarov plays bishop to c4. I castle, he goes bishop b3, d6, and we get this move f3. Now at this point, we've actually transposed back into a regular Yugoslav variation of the Sicilian dragon here, and there's a lot of play for both sides. Now here I decide to play this move queen to a5. Now, it's worth pointing out that I actually had something very similar to this from the pure dragon order. I guess I'll go back. Actually, I don't need to go back and show you that because it transposes, but I had a game against Anish Giri in 2012, I believe, in Tata Steel, where I traded and played this line with bishop e6, and it essentially transposes back into the game. But since I'm playing such a young opponent here, I figure the game was 2012, it's 11 years ago, there's no way he would be familiar with it. So we have queen d2, I trade on d4, bishop e6, castles, and now I play this move b5. Now, back in 2012, when I did play Anish Giri and Tata Steel, I played this move rook fc8, and the game ended in a draw very shortly after king b1, b5, the move bishop takes knight on f6, bishop takes bishop, knight d5, I swap the queens, he takes with check, check, takes, rook d2, and rook to c5, and here Anish and I agreed to a peaceful result. So I was a little bit hopeful that my opponent wouldn't be aware of that game, and obviously it comes from a much different order, so it's already hard to find the transposition. But even beyond that, I decided to deviate in this game 11 years later by playing the move b5, or I should say nearly 12 years, because that was January 2012, and it's October of 2023. So I played b5, and one funny note is that during this time, you'll notice that I was up 20 minutes on the clock. So I was wandering around the room just looking at other games, and lo and behold, I actually saw there was another game that had this exact same position on the board. Now, it was the game being played between, I think, two 2400s. One of them was an Indian player. I think it was like Serene or Sinit or something. Someone can probably find the game, but I did see this exact position, and it was highly amusing. So I go b5. Now, Sindarov is very unsure of himself. He did have a game against Matlikov earlier this year in the same position, where he was not able to prove much of an advantage. So I thought maybe he's still familiar with it, but at the end of the day, I'm blitzing every move, so he will be feeling uncomfortable. So here, Sindarov plays king to b1. Now I go b4, attacking the horse on c3, and he plays this move knight to d5. Now, white can also play the move knight to e2 here, or even bishop takes e6 and then knight e2, and it's still a very interesting tactical game. Instead, after b4, Sindarov plays knight to d5. I take with a bishop, he takes back, and now I go queen to b5 here. Idea behind queen b5 is pretty straightforward. You'll notice that there's this bishop that's walled in by the pawn, so there's no scope on the diagonal. So after I play queen to b5 here, I want to start pushing p and making his bishop on b3 feel really, really uncomfortable here. So he plays rook HE1. I go A5. Queen to E2 is played here, offering the trade of the queens, all the while targeting my pawn on E7. So I have to trade the queens, and now I play this move A4, bishop C4, and rook FC8. Now, this is still all my preparation. We are still following the very famous game that was played in 1959 between Michael Tal from the former Soviet Union, or from Latvia, and of course, Bent Larsen, one of the most famous Scandinavian players of all time outside of Magnus Carlsen. So we get bishop b5, I go rook a5, bishop f6, takes, bishop c6, and now I play a3. Now, once again, this is the exact same position as that famous game from 1959, featuring the soon-to-be world chess champion Michael Tal. Now, after a3, c3 is played here by Sindarov, trying to improve upon that famous game from all those years ago. Now, in that game between Michael Tal and Bent Larsen, the move b3 is played, and after king f8, Michael Tal played the move c4, going for a very similar idea to what Sindarov does in my game today. Now, in the game, Larsen played b takes c3, which is a terrible, terrible move. White's not actually that much better, but when you look at the quality of the players, the soon-to-be world champion Tal, and of course Larsen, Tal would just destroy Larsen very soon. The game would continue with king c2, rook a7. Tal starts pushing the p on the queen side with b4. We get e6, b5, e takes d5, b6. Just keep pushing that p. We get rook e7, trade, rook to e1 check, bishop e5 played. If black were to go king f8 here, white can win the game with b7. Rook to b8, and now after rook to e8 check, takes. White is getting a queen with b8, and it's GG, why not? So, in the game, Larsen plays bishop e5, we have b7, rook to b8, f4 played here, the bishop is pinned, we got king e6, takes, rook to b1, king d6, rook to b6, and Michael Tal would go on to win this game very soon with rook a6 and rook to a8. So a total destruction of that game from 1959, which I was aware of. So, back to my game. If b3 had been played in my game today, I would have played rook to c5 instead with the idea of e6. And after c4, I would not play end peasant. I would pretend that we're playing chess like it's 1,000 years ago and the glitch move doesn't exist. Instead, I would play e5 here. And the position is relatively balanced. On some level, computer thinks black could be better, but it's very hard with the opposite color bishops and ideas like g3 and f4 and rook e1. So I don't really think black has much of an edge. Instead, Sindarov plays c3, going for the classic Michael Tal idea, and now I play the move rook b8. Now, here I have to be very careful, because if I do take the pawn on c3, after after b3 here, we're going to end up in a similar situation where after rook b8, let's just say rook e4, not rook e4, sorry, king c2 first, because rook e4, I think, blunders some trick with rook b3, takes, and then c2 and a2 or something like this. Here, after king to c2 first, in this position, let's say I go like bishop e5, rook to e4. Again, white is trying to push p with b4 and b5, and it could get very tricky. Now, of course, computers being 3,500, they'd laugh at me and say, what are you worried about, bro? Just play f5, rook c4, rook c5, and after... Why can't I move them pieces? Rook c5, rook a4, and who cares? Just take a pawn on the edge. Who cares if white pushes p? Nobody cares. Just go rook c4, and after king to b3, rook h4 here, and I guess you're okay, even though it looks really scary with rook h1. Now, again, it's a weak engine, but a weak engine still is much better than any human. And honestly, I mean, this looks horribly scary to me, because if white can get this b-pawn down the board, white will win the game, but computers say it's fine. And pretty much like anything in chess, everything is fine. Don't see the boogeyman. Don't see John Wick. Just play moves, and if you can find some decent moves, you'll always be fine. That's the moral of the story. Now, of course, it's easier said than done, as we've seen from many Magnus Carlsen games, because there are many endgames the computers say, haha, easy draw, and then Magnus ends up winning them. So, instead, I play rook to b8 here, and now Sindarov has to trade the pawns on b4. If he were to try to play rook e4, hoping for takes, and b3 in this position, I would actually have the option to go b3 here, and now white cannot get a pass pawn on the queen side, because both of these pawns will be traded sooner or later. So we get c takes b4, rook takes b4. We have move b3 being played. Now I go rook to c5, rook to c1, and here I decide to play the move bishop g5, effectively offering a draw. Now, rook to d4 is also a move I can play, but after takes and king c2, there's really no way for me to be better here. White is just going to play rook e4 next move, trade the rooks, and then once the rooks come off the board, we're just going to end up with opposite color Bs, and this is just a dead draw. So I consider it for a bit, but then I realize, okay, there really isn't anything happening in the position, so instead I go bishop g5, trying to force the rooks off the board, all the while creating the cool right triangle. So Sindarov trades the rooks on c5, and now he plays the move rook to e4, and now the game is essentially drawn here, because the rooks are going to come off the board. If I don't trade the rooks, say I play rook b8, now after rook to a4, white is going to win this pawn in a3, and there's going to be a passed a pawn. White will start pushing the p, and maybe I can still draw, but if anybody's going to win, it will be white. And why do I want to take that risk? especially since I can't win the game. So instead I play f5, Cinderella plays rook takes rook, I take back with the pawn, and now we agree to a draw here after king c2 and bishop f4, because we've reached the 30th move, after which draws are allowed. And additionally here, after say h3, bishop d6, all of white's pawns are on light squares, most of my pawns are on dark squares here, and neither bishop can touch the pawns, and both sides can blockade quite easily. So after bishop f4, the game ends in a draw. That means that I moved to 4 points out of 5. I've won 3 games, drawn 2 games. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, I would have liked to have gotten more, but I did play a very aggressive opening with the Sicilian Dragon, and unfortunately, the game petered out to a draw, so it is what it is. At any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of both the Magnus Carlsen game as well as my game from round number 5 of the Qatar Masters Open being held here in Doha. If you have not already subscribed, make sure to smash that button below. And I will be back 2 days from now with a round six recap. Tomorrow is a rest day, so there'll be no games. But I'll be back on Tuesday to do a recap after round number 6. So stay tuned for that. All right, you guys. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys very soon. Have a great rest of your day.